Just a bit of background into this. So for the last 18 months, NTU have been conducting a study looking at student health. So the health of university students, and looking at how their health compares to general population and what impacts on student health. So as part of this study, and as part of with Matt doing his PhD, a big survey went out to all undergraduate students within the School of Science and Technology. And about 1,500 students responded with some of their almost their lifestyle and their almost health-related measures. Then obviously there was a global pandemic which caused students to be taken away from university, and Matt and some colleagues looked at how that pandemic impacted on student health in terms of exercise and lifestyle habits. So there's, on the Now, there is a paper that they published that links to this research, showing how student health has been impacted by this sort of pandemic. Part of this sort of student health study is looking at information regarding students. In today's lab, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of these measurements as well. So these measures, things like height and body mass, so to work out things like BMI is a commonly used measurement to look at individuals' health status. It has many drawbacks, but it is still commonly used. It will give us an indication of health. Waist to hip circumference, so that is like it sounds, measuring the circumference of the waist, measuring the circumference of the hips, and the ratio between the two can tell us about the storage of adipose tissue or fat tissue. Blood pressure and resting heart rate also give us an indication of someone's health, just at rest, no exercise. Vertical jump, we measure that using a vertical jump mat that is over there, and that gives an indication of power. So we'll ask you to put your hands on your hips and jump as high as you can in the air, okay, just to see how powerful your legs are. Hand grip strength, I'm sure some of you have used that before, where you measure your hand grip using a hand grip dynamometer, placed over there. And then finally you have this glycated hemoglobin. So, I'll tell you a little bit about that. So glycated hemoglobin is a measurement that we take that gives us an idea of how much glucose we have surrounding our hemoglobin. But it takes a measurement, the measurement is indicative of 2 to 3 months of your glucose levels. So in today's lab, the last thing we're going to do is take a blood sample and we're going to measure glucose levels, but we're not going to actually use that in the study. The reason being is because that glucose level is heavily influenced by your dietary habits. Okay, so I imagine most of your breakfast this morning, yeah? Okay, and that may or may not have contained some kind of like sugary substance. So if you like Frosties or something like that, you may have had a big bowl of Frosties. That is going to cause an increase in your glucose. If you've been just woken up and you come in fasted, you will have a lower glucose level than that person that's had a big bowl of Frosties. That doesn't say anything about your health status. That just says that I've had a big bowl of Frosties in the last hour and I've fasted for the last 12 hours. Okay? So we're going to measure glucose today, just to ensure that everyone is okay with taking a blood sample, a bit of almost a practice if you like. But we're not actually going to use that in the study. So there are two options in today's class. You can either do the class as normal, okay, and you fill in one of these data collection sheets that are coloured in white, or you can fill in exactly the same form that's coloured in yellow, and you can use your data to be part of a research study. Okay, so only 10% of students are meeting the recommended portions of fruit and veg. 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. That is minutes per week. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you do all 150 minutes in one day or you do them across the week in equal portions. That is the guidelines, 150 minutes per week. But it gets a little bit complicated because that's moderate intensity exercise. So it's 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise or 75 minutes of high intensity vigorous exercise. And again, it doesn't differentiate between if you did all that in one day or you do it over the course of the week. What percentage of students reported meeting this criteria? 40%? 35%? 20%? Okay? 66% of students. So the government says you should reduce sedentary time as much as possible. Okay? So there is no guideline on how many hours you should be sedentary for. So this could be taken to the extreme where people don't sit down at all because they're trying to reduce it as much as possible. But there is no time that is okay to reduce. And in terms of students meeting these guidelines, 73% of NTU students were said to spend 6 hours or greater doing sedentary behaviour. Predictions for mental health condition in the general population, 16 to 24-year-olds. What percentage? 60%? 40%? 25%? Okay, so we've got quite a big range there. The actual percentage is 19%. So a little bit lower than somebody thought there, so 19%. How about in university students? Well, let's go higher or lower. Higher or lower than the 19% of the general population. So how many of you think is higher in university students? Okay, all of you. Majority of you. You're correct. Okay, 28.6% of students. Okay, so students suffer from a greater mental health risk than the general population according to this data. How about overweight or obese? Okay, what percentage of the UK 16 to 24-year-olds are either overweight or obese? 4%? Anyone want to go any higher than 4%? 15%?
30%.
30%. Going up and up. Actual number is 35%. In university students, do you think it's higher or lower? So hands up for higher, or one person? Hands up for lower. Okay, so people put lower are right, but only by 0.1%. So 34.9% of students are classified as being overweight or obese. Now we can then go and do our battery of tests. Okay, so some of these will be a bit of a recap for you from your first lab. So things like blood pressure, cuffs are on the table here. Heart rate monitors are on the back over there. So with heart rate, if you can just sit down on a chair just for a couple of minutes to get a true resting heart rate rather than sort of talking or moving around because it will likely to inflate your heart rate. Height and body mass. So we have a stadiometer here. So height should be done with shoes off. There are instructions on here as well on how to measure it. But you should be facing the window, shoes off. We have some weighing scales, so some very accurate weighing scales down here as well. Again, shoes off and remove any heavy items. Like so if you have a phone in your pocket or something, just put your phone on the side while you're weighing yourself. Waist and hip circumference. So there's some tape measures and instructions over there how to do that. So your waist and your hips, and we look at the ratio between that. Vertical jump height we do using this this kit here, where you put a strap around your waist. We'll come around because it's quite small and show you how to do that, but you sort of wind in the string and then with your hands placed on your hips, you jump as high as possible in the air. Hand grip strength, we use dynamometers, which are based on the side over there. Again, there is information on how to use them. Please make sure you sanitize your hands and you wipe down the dynamometers before and after use. And then after you've done that first battery test, we're going to have a go at taking blood again. So you should know how to do this. If you didn't come to the first lab for whatever reason, there's no problem. But just give Matt or I a shout. We'll give you some information on what you need to do to take the blood sample. If you've done it previously, you can just get a tray and get the paraphernalia you need and take a sample. And we're more interested in glucose than we are in lactate today. before I go through this, just before I forget, the next lab session that you do will involve exercise. So please come dressed, I think everyone today is, but come dressed to exercise because there's an exercise component to the body. Okay? But go back today. So, in terms of the measures you've taken, there's some questions. So, normal blood pressure. So I think I told this to most people, but I didn't speak to you. So a normal blood pressure would be 120 over 80 millimetres of mercury. Okay? So remember we have two measures. There are a diastolic and a systolic measurement. The systolic is the higher measurement, the diastolic would be the lower measurement. It measures in millimetres of mercury or mmHg. They're important things to note as well. So the anthropometric measures, so things like height and body mass. One of the questions is, what do we use this to calculate? So obviously if we said someone weighs 50 kilos, someone weighs 100 kilos, you can't tell if someone is overweight or not from that measurement. Okay, so we don't know enough about the person to know if they're overweight or not from just a body mass score. So using body mass index, which is not perfect, so there's lots of drawbacks with that. One, doesn't account for things like muscle mass, which is the biggest issue. But we can use that in the general population to work out whether someone is classed in an overweight, normal, underweight, obese category. Next question, what might a normal waist to hip ratio be? Okay, so you've all measured waist to hip ratios on there. So there shouldn't be normally a massive difference between someone's hip and their waist. Normally the waist is a smaller one. So it should be in men around 0.9 and in women around 0.85. Okay, so they're normal hip to waist ratio classifications. When you're doing the power and the strength measurements, so the counter movement jump and the hand grip, why do we do any practice tests? Anyone know? Why do we practice? Why don't we just go straight into 3 tests? Yeah, it might be the first time using the equipment, so it might be you're not familiar with the technique, so it gives you a couple of practices to have a go with. If you were to score, let's say you scored 20 on your first attempt, 25 on your second, and 30 on your third attempt, what would you do? Pardon? Can't hear you. By the average? You could do that, but it seems to suggest you're improving every time you do it. So that suggests there's some kind of learning effect in that. Okay, so what you would do is you would carry on until you start to get worse. Okay, because it's unlikely that you would improve by that amount every time you did it. So from your data, did you find much of a difference between your dominant and non-dominant hand? You did? Okay, was dominant normally stronger than non-dominant? Yeah? So obviously the reason for that is probably quite obvious, in that if you're dominant with one hand, obviously things like writing, you want to open a door, etc., etc. But if any of you play in sports that may have like a unilateral component, so obviously things like hockey, you have one hand which is more dominant on the stick. Basketball, if you're shooting, you normally shoot with one hand more than you would another. So that can obviously increase the chances of having a greater strength in one arm compared to the other. So in terms of the blood measurements, so I mentioned at the start, so we said about glycolated hemoglobin as a measurement, because this measures long-term blood glucose, yeah, over 2 to 3 months. So we can look and detect any long-term glucose situations. We haven't got the kits, unfortunately, haven't arrived in time for us to do that today, so we've just measured glucose. But it's important to understand why glucose is quite a poor measurement of health status, particularly if we're not controlling what you've done prior to coming to the lab. Okay, so if you were to eat a sugary cereal or some kind of sugar-rich meal before coming in, you probably have quite a high glucose level in the lab session. Someone that has fasted and only just woken up and they didn't have anything to eat since 8 o'clock last night is likely to have a lower glucose level. Okay, but that doesn't indicate health status, that just indicates one person has eaten, one person hasn't. That's why we're not using that as a measurement of health status. So one final thing to mention before we go. So if you've got a yellow sheet, if you can pass it to me before you go. With your handouts and things from the lab session, these are on the now. So if you lose them, you can always get them again. However, it is important, or I recommend, that you keep hold of the lab handouts. The reason being that in your assessment, your practical assessment for this module, you will be assessed on your practical skills. So you'll be assessed on one of 6 skills that you will have learned in these lab sessions. In that practical exam, it is a practical exam and you're judged on your practical skills. You're not judged on your ability to remember things. So, for that reason, you can take in your lab handouts with you. You can have them as almost like a comfort blanket. So if you're not sure of something, you can glance at it and make sure you know how to do it. Okay? So just to reiterate what I've said in the introductory videos, in the assessment, you will not know what you're going to be assessed on before you arrive. You'll know it could be one of 6 things. So the idea is that you're good, really good at doing 6 different techniques, so it doesn't really matter what you're assessed on. So, if you've got all your handouts from the lab sessions, and I tell you you're doing a certain technique or a certain skill, you can go into your bag, you can take out those handouts that were related to that, and have that if you need them. Okay? So, if you've got one of these, I would like to have it from you, but please take a picture of it so you've got that information before giving it to you.